Dr. Perriman, thank you for being here with me today. There's currently a U.S. blockade now in effect as of just minutes ago. What are you expecting to happen over the coming days, coming hours, even?
Well, I think part of the difficulty is from the geopolitical standpoint, none of us know what's going to happen. But as long as the straits are closed, whether it's by us or whether it's by Iran or whether it's by the things underneath the surface or whatever the case may be, as long as the straits are closed, oil prices are going to remain elevated because about 20% of the world's supply gets out and into the marketplace through that strait. And so anytime it is blocked, you're going to see higher oil prices. It appears as if that may last a bit longer than we thought, but it's a very unpredictable situation right now.
Is the Strait of Hormuz the most critical oil route in the world?
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, a lot of oil gets shipped out of the Texas ports as well. I mean, there's a lot, but the difficulty is virtually all Middle Eastern oil is exported. Very little of it's used internally, and it is about 20% of the supply, and it's a critical supply for certain countries, and so it tends to have a disproportionate effect sometimes. But it's a very narrow waterway. That's the other thing that's unusual about it. Most of them are pretty wide. Most places the ship oil would be pretty hard to block the whole thing off. But with the strait, it's a very narrow space there, and so it's relatively easy to block it. And of course, in the current situation, there's evidently mines underneath the strait, a lot of other things that are going to have to be dealt with as we move forward.
Now, you mentioned the unpredictability. Talk to me a bit more about that, how that could specifically impact, this conflict moving forward.
Well, we're seeing it all the time. I mean, we got a ceasefire one day, and oil prices went down $20. When the ceasefire wasn't holding, then oil prices started back up. When the U.S. decided to close the straits, they went up some more. So it's basically a volatile situation. Markets tend to overreact to short-term events in situations like this. And so basically any headline can move the market a lot in either direction, which we've already seen to some extent.
And what could this mean for fuel prices, gas prices specifically, heading into the next few weeks, the coming months potentially?
Well, again, it depends on how long it lasts. If the straits were to be blockaded for, say 2 or 3 months, you might well see oil back up to $120, which would probably put gasoline up in the high fives, possibly even $6 a gallon. If that persisted, I don't think that will be the case. I think the combination of some progress being made there and the pending midterm elections, I think the combination of those two things will probably result in things being opened up to some extent relatively soon. The other wild card is there's been a lot of infrastructure damage to energy infrastructure in the Middle East. And while they're dropping bombs, nobody's going in there to look at it. So we don't know exactly how severe that is. That will determine what the supply situation looks like after the straits are open. And the price will certainly come down and come down quite a bit. I don't know if it'll come back down to the levels where it was before this thing started.
Why is that?
Well, basically, there may be as much as 5, 6, 7% of the world's oil supply that the infrastructure that generates it is damaged, and so consequently, it won't be able to be in the market, and it would take months for other producers to replace that. And so again, that's a situation we're not going to really have a lot of clarity on until we get to a little more stable situation in the military aspects of it.
And just to clarify, when you say you don't see prices going back to the way they were before, you're talking like the 250 range, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't. It may well be, and we'll just have to see. It may be that it can all be repaired very quickly and everything goes back to normal, but it may well be that some of that infrastructure is going to change the market supply situation in a different way and cause prices to be elevated to some extent from what they were before this whole thing started.
Could you see this conflict and this blockade, discussion about the Strait of Hormuz leading other companies to decide, we're not going to go through this area anymore. We're going to find another route, or we're just not going to ship our goods through there. Could you see companies decide not to do that long term?
Well, the difficulty you have is there is no other route for a lot of this. I mean, that's the only way to get it out, and that's the difficulty and why the strait's been strategically important. What you could see happen over an extended period of time is there's plenty of oil reserves in the Permian Basin. There's plenty of oil reserves in several other countries in the world. You could see the companies shift more of their investment to places beyond the Middle East. If this thing looks like it's going to persist for a long period of time, it's going to take a pretty difficult situation for people to make that decision, because they do have a lot already invested in the Middle East. But there are other oil supplies out there in the world, including right here in Texas and New Mexico, that could replace that oil over time, given sufficient investment.
So this could lead to more increased growth of the energy industry here in Texas.
It's possible. Again, right now, what we see is, the oil companies are certainly making a little more money because they're selling for a higher price, but there hasn't been a big change in the rig count. There hasn't been any major drilling program announced, anything like that, because you don't make those decisions based on what happens for a few weeks. They'll wait to see if the situation becomes a bit more clear. But if it becomes sort of a permanent situation that's just going to be much more difficult to do business in the Middle East, then that starts making the investments in the United States and elsewhere look more attractive. And Texas, New Mexico, the Permian Basin already produces half of the oil in the United States. The United States is the world's largest producer, and there's still ample reserves out there. So there's options the companies have if this thing persists for an extended period of time.
Now, we talked about, gas prices. Are there any other impacts, whether, not just economically, but just in general, that this blockade could have over the long term?
Oh, certainly. One thing is, again, we all focus on the price of gasoline. It's the most watched price in the world because we see it every day. Whether you buy gas today or not, you're going to drive by 20 gas stations. They're going to have the price up in lights, and it can't help but get into your head. And that's what we use. But just on the oil side and nothing else, diesel prices have gone up even more than gasoline prices. Virtually everything we transport, every food commodity, materials, equipment, everything we transport with diesel, the jet fuel prices have gone up. And then petroleum is used in a lot of other things. Petroleum is the base of plastics, paints, some pharmaceuticals, adhesives, cosmetics. I mean, a lot of things in our everyday life are tied to petroleum, and higher prices in petroleum work their way through a lot of different pieces of the economy. It takes a little bit longer for those than it does for gasoline, but nonetheless, those kind of impacts are out there. In addition to just kind of changing the whole dynamic of how people trade around the world and some of those broader, longer term impacts, just petroleum itself is a huge part of the economy. I think a lot of people often don't realize that.
Petroleum impacts not just gas, but other sectors as well.
Exactly. I mean, asphalt. I mean, the list goes on and on of things that are made from petroleum. And again, when you start raising the cost of all those things and the cost of transporting everything, whether like food products that have to be delivered every few days, well, most of those are transported by diesel. Some of them are in refrigerated trucks, and diesel runs the refrigeration. That takes a lot of energy, and so there's just a lot of dynamics out there underlying this because of the fact that it is the petroleum industry that's affected.
I do want to ask, could you see this leading to the point where there isn't enough supply of oil in the United States for people to be able to drive where they want to go or fly to, see family or anything like that?
I don't see that at all. We faced real dangers like that back during the embargo in the 1970s and even more recently in some situations. But since about 2008 or so, when the new technologies came into the drilling and they found new reserves, started drilling more, there's ample oil in the United States to provide our energy needs. We're the largest producer in the world right now, and we can produce a lot more if we need to. So unlike prior situations, and there's also a lot of oil in Canada and Mexico, which are generally friendly trading partners. So unlike the situation that was in place a number of years ago, the United States is energy secure at this point in time.
So if you had to say something to, East Texans who may be watching this, what would you tell them as this conflict continues and what they can expect moving forward?
Well, it's a volatile situation, but I would say, keep your eyes on what's going on with policy because that makes a big difference. But basically, I would say I think it's reasonable to assume that we're going to be back to some sort of new normal well prior to the midterm elections. I think just the political realities often trump the economics, and I think the political realities of very high gasoline prices and other inflationary pressures coming into an election is going to be enough to get to some type of resolution here.
What do you mean by new normal? Just to clarify that.
But by new normal, I simply mean, you know, it may not be as, the prices may not be quite as low as they were before the situation. There may not be quite as much supply of oil available in the world, and we'll have to do some things to make up for it. Basically, that, you know, something has changed here, and until we can see how much damage has been done, we're simply not going to know what it's going to look like afterwards. But I do think it'll be a lot closer to what it was before this started than what it is now.